Foreign editors of film well, thank you very much for making time. Prof, I watched the proceedings today. I must say I don't have much money, but I'm not putting my money on MDC Alliance.
Okay, we'll make a bet. Bottle of champagne.
Well, I'll be expelled from church, so let's keep it on the money side.
Non-alcoholic.
Yeah. What did you make of today's proceedings?
Well, I wasn't able to watch it all. I was lecturing, but I caught probably half of it tonight. And I think the Zek and Mnangagwa's case was based on technicalities. The affidavit and the documents were submitted too late. But then Tabani Mpofu, who was the MDC's lawyer, who I thought presented a very good presentation, said, well, look, we gave it to the sheriff, but the sheriff didn't get it to them on time. Some of the applicants, you know, there were 22, 21 other applicants, they didn't get theirs in on time. And I think Tabani Mpofu shed enough doubt on the numbers that Zek produced to cast doubt on the proceedings. He said, look, it took you 3 times to give us different numbers. You changed your number in the last analysis from 50.8 to 50.6. So we're talking about 32,000, 35,000 votes here. And if we cast doubt on the 16 polling stations that were ghost polling stations, the couple of stations that were more than 100% votes, some stations had exactly the same numbers for both candidates, duplicate numbers. And that's just counting alone, which is the nitty-gritty. There's all the other issues, lack of freedom of the press, intimidation, polling agents being taken, MDC polling agents being taken away from their posts, and one of the husband of one of them was apparently sodomized, and being told to sign blank V11 forms. So there seemed to be enough, you know, nitty-gritty evidence that would, for me, say the MDC case is victorious. But we have a lot of other considerations to take into account.
So the judges kept on hammering on the fact that there's primary evidence, secondary evidence.
Yes, indeed. When you look at what transpired today, the whole case hang around evidence. The primary evidence must be convincing, not secondary evidence. That's what the judges were probing. Secondly, the issue of the polling stations. Yes, Zek has admitted that there was a marginal error in terms of the 2 polling stations, but MDC is arguing that it's 16. And the judge seemed to agree that there are discrepancies in 16 polling stations based on what he has, the evidence presented by the MDC. But the question is, the numbers in those 16 polling stations, are they huge enough to change the number that gave Mnangagwa victory? I'm talking about, as it has been revised now, to 50.6. Is it enough to change the number? That's a big question. The second issue, the judge was concerned that they didn't go for recount. Why you don't go for recount? You start with basics, then you move to the complex or abstract approach. The starting point, you ask for a recount when you are aggrieved. Therefore, it's very, very, very difficult to predict what's likely to happen on Friday. But when I looked at the body language of the judges and the questions, I don't know whether MDC was able to present the so-called primary evidence that is convincing.
What at the level at which the matter is, Prof, what is it? Do you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt, or probability of irregularity?
Well, I guess if you really want to go down to the technicalities, if there's any doubt shown about the way in which the election was managed and the counting took place, that should be enough. Now, for the recount, I think the court can decide if a recount is necessary. So they could say, okay, let's recount. You guys didn't have time to recount, and you have shown us copies of the documents of the V11s and so on. which of course is, what Thabo Mbeki instituted in the 2008 election was this posting the V11s on the polling stations, and so anybody can take a picture of them and send them back to anybody to count. And that was seen as a credible way of a secondary or a ancillary way of counting by the SADC electoral rules, which was actually set up in 2004 at Mauritius. So the primary and secondary evidence, I think Thabani Mpofu said, well, we didn't recount, we didn't have time, we weren't able to do that. But you can recount them now. So the court could say, okay, let's have a recount. Yeah. And so you're going to go back and justify or have the parliamentary counts equal the presidential counts, because there were some discrepancies there. I think Mpofu said there could be 40,000 under consideration, and he talked about the teachers who were polling agents and who didn't vote. Mm-hmm. He talked about between 8,000 and 7,000 missing unverifiable numbers. So I didn't see the body language of the constitutional, but of the court. But ZANU-PF appointed those. Yep. Some of them were appointed by Mugabe. Yep. Only two of them were appointed by Mnangagwa. I think it was Garwe who was actually at the trial of Morgan Tsvangirai in 2002, which George Bizos was the main advocate for. So some of them have made good decisions, some of them have made bad decisions, some of them seem to be clearly ZANU-PF, but we don't know if they're kind of G40 or Lacoste. So I think the last time, 2013, Morgan Tsvangirai said, I don't trust the courts. Yeah. So, but they said they're going to do a ruling anyway. It took them 4 years to do the ruling. But they did not account for the technicalities. They accounted for what they counted for. Okay. And it struck me that the ZEC case was based on technicalities. Oh, you were too late. Oh, you're mischievous. Oh, you're making a prayer for relief. Oh, you're flippant. That's kind of not the type of language that you would expect to see in a court. It's casting aspersions on but whether this influences the court or not, and whether the court has actual freedom and autonomy is an open question.
So, we know that the MDC does not trust this court, basically. But do you have a feeling, or do you get a feeling that Zimbabweans, I mean, you were moving around Zimbabwe, Zimbabweans have confidence in this process? Do they trust this process?
It depends who you're speaking to. And at the moment, and that's the problem with politicians, it's all about themselves to access power and authority. At the end of the day, ordinary people are suffering. For Zimbabweans, their priority is to see the country returning to a situation where they are able to survive, to undo the damage, to ensure that there's economic growth, there are jobs for young people, and therefore it will be very difficult for them to say whether they trust the courts or they don't trust the courts. But some are vocal, are saying they don't trust the courts, others are saying we do trust the courts. But the primary task for any leader that is going to be the president of Zimbabwe and the commander-in-chief at the end of the day, what Zimbabweans want is a better life for all.
Now, obviously on Friday, 2 p.m., an announcement is going to be made. It either affirms ED or orders a rerun or a recount or whatever the case is. And whose benefit do you think this decision would serve?
It depends, but at the end of the day, the decision must benefit the ordinary Zimbabweans. Whoever becomes the president of the Republic of Zimbabwe, the commander-in-chief, the responsibility is to ensure that you rebuild the country and ordinary people can survive. A better life for all, not a better life for the political elite.
Well, as we
can agree on.
as we wrap up, Prof, obviously MDC has said, they really do not care. They don't recognize this outcome, and it's a victory for MDC Alliance or nothing. So we don't know why actually they're even going through this, because they've already said that, look, we don't recognize these things.
Well, I think there is a recognition of this. They have gone forth with it. They brought in Dali Mpofu, Jeremy Gauntlet. They've got very good lawyers of Zimbabweans. And I think what's interesting here is we're seeing kind of a dialectic. We're seeing the democratization of a country which hasn't had democracy since Ian Smith, or well before that. And so we're seeing this dialectic between a democratic process, a constitutional process. I mean, now we have thousands of people watching this. We have people reading the Constitution.
International community
International
watching.
And locally, diaspora. And we have this counterposed with what happened the day after I left being interviewed by Peter in Harare. We had August 1st, and we had 6 people being killed. And we don't know who killed them. The head of the military said, oh, I didn't authorize this. Mnangagwa was saying, oh, let's have an inquiry. So we have a dialectic here between the militarization of a society and a state, and there's lots of evidence about the way the state has been securitized in the past 20 years, probably before that if we think of the guerrilla war. So it's a fascinating process to watch and for people to experience, and they're watching democracy play itself out. Now, AC Lumumba, for example, a few weeks ago said, you know, this is theater. This is the MDC playing theater. Well, it is theater. Politics is theater.
Yep.
We are seeing debates with intensely intelligent lawyers, and people are watching them. It's like watching Perry Mason in the old days, you know, the law programs on TV.
Yeah.
And it can work. And we are, even if the court goes ZANU-PF way, and we're not happy with that, we've seen the escalation of a democratization process, which is good. And the court can also, it can make a decision on its own. It doesn't have to just say run off or approve it. It can say we need a unity government, basically. It can say these sorts of things.
Do you think they could go that way?
They might, because the runoff scares people. Remember 2008, when 170 MDC supporters were...
I think for me, the lesson here is that as Africans, we must be proud. Today, it feels good for me to be an African, because starting with East Africa, you'd recall the Kenyan elections, where much as the Electoral Commission there had declared Uhuru Kenyatta the president-elect, later on, the Constitutional Court overturned that decision.
Correct.
And there was a rerun. Of course, Raila Odinga didn't participate. And now you have Raila Odinga and Kenyatta talking, because they have accepted that the country is divided, and both leaders must ensure that they unite the country. Now you have Zimbabwe again. It's a similar situation. Fortunately, again, on the continent, we have this challenge. We didn't resort to the barrel of the gun to resolve the problem. In Zimbabwe, we are using the constitutional means. You can question the credibility of either the politicians or the observers or the judges, but at the end of the day, we are trying to use the constitutional processes to resolve this standoff. At the end of the day, it will be up to the court to ensure that its credibility is restored. But secondly, whoever finally, whether it's after the rerun or Friday or whenever, or it's a government of national unity, whoever is going to be a head of state in Zimbabwe must ensure that the responsibility first task is to unite the Zimbabweans.
Do you think there's perhaps just taking it a little bit off, this gives President Ramaphosa sleepless nights? I mean, he's supposed to go to Lesotho in 2 days. Actually, on the same day, yes. He'll be dealing with other issues there.
Yes, theater of politics on the continent, but leaders are there. They are trying to resolve the problems in the region, not with the barrel of the gun, with the negotiations. And I think a call by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, when I spoke to him in January this year, saying to me, it's good that African leaders are the ones driving the development on the continent, but also resolving the problems of the continent. You know very well, tomorrow we are told that the opposition, one of the opposition leaders, Mutejwa Mitsing, is going back to Lesotho to join the political forum where they will be discussing the reforms. And we are told President Ramaphosa, who was appointed by SADC, is likely to go back on Friday to be part of that. Our own former Deputy Chief Justice, Dikgang Seneke, is there to assist Africans solving their own problems.
Well, I just hope that one day we won't have to summon all these envoys to talk elections outcomes.
But in America, same challenges. In Europe, they have same challenges.
Okay.
Global affairs.
I think it would be interesting to see if the court decided that they needed a runoff election, would they be able to say that ZEC was incapable of running it? Okay. And if that was the case, would SADC be given the chance to run it, or the AU, or the United Nations? We have Zimbabweans who have run elections all over the world.
Okay. Well, let's continue this discussion on WhatsApp.
And the DRC is coming.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we return, the Globe gives you more news.